There you go. Dr. Eric G. Strauss is our speaker today. He is the President's Professor of Biology at Loyola Marymount University, and he is the founding executive director of the Center for Urban Resilience, something I think we're all interested in, also at Loyola Marymount. And I just learned that he has his fingers in other pies too, but these relate to what we're doing today. He's going to talk to us about.
Hi.
Right. Hi, Janet. Mute yourself. He's going to talk to us about hummingbirds of the GOTTLIEB native garden. And I'll just show you the book, which he has written. We're plenty of pictures in it. We're going to love it. Dr. Strauss studies animal behavior, wildlife management, urban ecology, and science education. He moved here from the East Coast, and he said one of the joys of doing that was being able to see hummingbirds every day. He's joined also by an associate from the GOTTLIEB Native Garden, Lisa Fimiani. So they're both here with us today. And now I'm going to turn this over to you, Dr. Eric. He said, call him Eric. And I'm going to turn off my speaker.
Wonderful. Kathy, can you hear me okay? Does the sound level fine?
You sound great.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all folks so much for inviting me here today. I am so pleased. I wish we were in person, and I had hoped we were getting closer in the spring. I mean, I imagine like most of you, I'm fully vaccinated, and now the concern with the Delta variant and additional variants that are coming along. This is, as I'm sure Deep would explain to you in better detail, when you're dealing with viral communities, it's very unpredictable. And this is one of the things, although it doesn't sound like we're talking about hummingbirds, you know, there's a sense of a national and global frustration that first the scientists are telling us this, and they're telling us that, and the Centers for Disease Control suggest this and suggest that. Well, remember, we're science driven. And when the science suggests that new information is useful in changing our course, we do that. And we may have to change our course multiple times before we're out of the crisis of this pandemic. And I apologize, but I hope you'll stay with us and buckle your seatbelts, because I think the scientific community, the medical community is doing the very best we can. This is an extraordinary time we're living through, and unlike anything I've seen in my life. So, and I'm also delighted to be here with Lisa Fimiani, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Urban Resilience. She's before that, she was the executive director of the Friends of the Iona Wetlands. She's an expert in native gardens and ornithology. She's an absolute joy. She helped a lot with the book. She works full-time with us at the center. And so anytime she's willing to join us and contribute to the conversation, it's a huge advantage. And so I'm excited that she's with us today. And I understand you're all part of the Garden Clubs of California, which is fantastic. It seems like a wonderful network to me. And so today, in addition to talking about hummingbirds, what I want to do is to talk about hummingbirds in the context of the urban environments in which they live. Because they're not only the extraordinary animals, we call them extremophiles because of the characteristics of their metabolism and their lifestyle, but also because they are actually doing so well in many of these urbanized habitats, and some of the populations are burgeoning. And so it's really quite interesting. And we're also going to introduce the idea of a synanthrope later in the talk today, which are animals that live in close proximity to humans. An urban wild spaces shelter an incredibly diverse community. This is Allen's male hummingbird. They are particularly well adapted to living in urban areas. And as you probably know, if you have a feeder nearby, they will go about their lives right next to your head and basically ignore you. because in their experience, you've never tried to eat them. So, and you're not competing for the same food they are. So you really are unimportant in their lives. And so we get to observe them. And it's one of the cool things about being an urban ecologist, because if you study animal behavior, ultimately what you're trying to do is watch the animals do their thing and understand why they do what they do. And if they're doing things in response to you, it really disrupts the ability to collect the data. So working with urban animals who are used to having people all around them makes it actually much easier in order to gather information about their lives. So urban ecology is a rapidly expanding field, because we got to understand cities. We got to get cities right. It's where the majority of the world's population live. I'm also delighted that we were able to produce this book with support from the GOTTLIEB Foundation. We also had support from the National Science Foundation to write additional curricula for Urban Ecolab, which is another book that I've done, and include components about hummingbirds. And we run a program for K-12 educators, and we provide this curriculum for them free of charge. We get support from GOTTLIEB's and from the National Science Foundation, others, Annenberg Pet Space Foundation, and so forth. So it's a wonderful publishing project. As you know, there's multiple books that have emerged, different authors working together, and it's really like a family. We've had a wonderfully extraordinary time doing this project together. And with deep gratitude toward Dan and Susan Gottlieb. No book is ever written by just a single author. You know, the photographs in the book were taken by Dan. We had incredible support from Dr. Lisa Tell from the University of California. Lily Colton served as the editor-in-chief, work from Lisa Fimiani, Dr. Peter Maria Auger, longtime colleagues of mine, helping to conduct research and education projects at the Gottlieb Garden, and of course, Scott Logan, who you may have already heard from or probably will in one of these talks, and then a student of mine, Eric Eberts, who really was the force behind launching our hummingbird project at Loyola Marymount University. He had such interest in it. He's now getting his PhD at the University of Toronto studying hummingbirds, and he and I have a paper coming out in the next month. It will be his first paper as a scientist, and it's really quite exciting. And thanks to Susan. I mean, Susan's such an extraordinary force in helping preserve the critical aspects of nature. I can't say enough about her. I can say she's from Canada, so that helps you understand. My mother's family's from Canada, and I just adore Canadians at first blush, and I've almost never disappointed because of their huge hearts and belief in the power of nature. You know, when you live in Canada, nature's all around you, and the weather and the temperatures and the seasons are extreme, so you feel humbled. You know, here in Southern California, where it's almost always sunny and manageable, you get a little bit of a sense of hubris that you're a little more in control than you really are. And when you go to these more extreme places, I've studied mountain goats in northern British Columbia, and man, do you feel small when your base camp's at 11,000 feet and you look around and can't see any signs of anybody's house or any agricultural fields or anything. You know, you'd be dropped in by helicopter. It's important for us as humans to recognize that our intellects and imagination can be boundless, but our physicality is small within the world. And so we are both blessed and challenged by that dichotomy. So let's talk about urban ecology for a moment, so we can kind of situate the idea of studying hummingbirds. So the theory of urban ecology, which is a relatively new science, is that social and environmental well-being are inextricably linked and in constant flux. When I was in graduate school in the 1980s, there were social scientists who were worrying about issues of criminality and social justice and racial equality and things like that. Then there were scientists like me who were worried about clean air, clean water, biodiversity, endangered species. And we were in different parts of the university, often different colleges. You know, one group studying the College of Liberal Arts, the other studying College of Science and Engineering. We had different language. We didn't work together. And over the past 25 or 30 years, with help from the National Science Foundation and other organizations, it's been recognized that if we're going to have healthy urban environments, we need to bring those communities of study together. And it's launched a new understanding of healthy communities called resilience. And so what does this really mean? It means that resilient, livable cities are only possible if human residents are healthy in their neighborhood. And this includes this rapidly changing relationship with nature, both wild and domestic, embedded in this rich biodiverse landscape, supporting what we call ecosystem services. And what might be surprising to you is that when people imagine cities, they imagine the loss of wildlife, the loss of green space. But in fact, in most American cities, and in fact, most global cities, if you were to take a square acre of the city and turn it upside down and shake out all the animals into a big pile, that pile would be just as large if you did that in the land that was there before the city. So we don't alleviate or eliminate nature when we build cities, we alter it, which means that all the forces of nature are there. And we can learn to manage cities so we harness the benefits of nature as we build our cities. And that's the impassioned vision that drives those of us who work in the field of urban ecology. Because many of my ecologist colleagues say, wouldn't you rather just be up in the Angeles Crest or out in the Los Padres watching condors? And I said, yeah, I do that whenever I get a chance. But 70% of Americans live in cities. We got to get cities right, because if the planet is going to survive 10 billion people, and we're almost there, people have to be living in urban areas because their carbon footprints, the amount of energy and materials it takes to keep a person alive, is much lower when they live in cities than when they live distributed in suburban or rural environments. And so America is rapidly becoming urbanized. And what does that mean? It means we're becoming more efficient with our agriculture. We've been able to reforest 700 million acres of land that had been cleared prior to that, because people aren't living in those situations. So we've been rewilding. So these areas are supporting top order predators that they've never done in the past as we become more urban. So we must cease seeing the city as the problem. We must see the city as the solution to the problem. But when we build cities, we do lots of things that are complex, and many of them are not good. We fragment habitats. We remove or reduce top order predators. It's been a long time since, say, mountain lions walked down Main Street in Burbank. And for good reason, that top order predators are not really compatible with high density human living. So we're not going to see bears. We're not going to see mountain lions. We're not going to see wolves. So those top order predators are gone. So that has big implications. It changes the way in which energy moves through the city, productivity. The changes in stress related factors such as temperature, nutrients. Cities tend to be hotter, but they also tend to have more material for food. Changes in species composition, the kind of species that can live there. And of course, you add human activities. So what does that result? These are forces that result in increased spatial heterogeneity, which means cities are more complex ecosystems than the ones they replaced, because remnants of the ones they replaced are still there, plus all the new environments that are created by building a city. There's changes in trophic control, which means the way in which energy moves through the city and moves through the ecosystem and controls what animals can survive and what can't. Historically, animal populations were controlled, as were plant populations, by predators, right? Certain predators are plant predators. They eat plants, and that keeps the number of plants evenly distributed. And then animal predators keep smaller animals from dominating the landscape. Well, in many ways, they're gone. And so what controls these trophic controls? There's events called local extinction, which is called extirpation, actually the formal term. And changes in the scales in which things work. That's one of the hardest things to understand, the change in temporal and spatial scales. You know, ecologists used to think that the basic unit of time in ecology was 10,000 years. That's about how long it took for significant changes in ecosystems to happen. But we've only been building cities, modern cities, for 150 years, and we've seen profound changes in less than 1% of the amount of time we thought was necessary for significant change. So the books of science about evolution are being rewritten because urbanization and human impact has compressed time in ways that are almost impossible to manage. So as humans, we call biogeosocial drivers, forces that change the environment. Let's take an example of Biona, which is the wetland system adjacent to LMU. We modify the hydrology here in Southern California. We had terrible floods for many generations, and to control the flooding in Southern California, we built these sluiceways and canals that quickly remove floodwaters. That part is good. We don't have the same kind of floodings we used to, but we lose all that fresh water that would otherwise be infiltrating. We build levees, culverts, we pave roads. Unfortunately, that effect has been to degrade water quality because of trash, point and non-point source pollution, bacterial and pathogen impairments, nutrient impairments, and so forth. And then we've altered the habitat by allowing non-native plants to flourish and non-native predators to roam those lands. And there are additional stressors such as the vector control, the toxins we put down to control insects, and physical modifications of the land by making some areas of land higher and other areas lower. And then, of course, we have the climate chaos we're living through right now with this rapid sea level rise and change in rain patterns and other kinds of long-term changes in rain and weather patterns that are going to pretty dramatically alter the community. And probably the most important thing that happens when we build cities or when humans do intensive agriculture is that we change the nature of the landscape. We break the landscape up into smaller pieces, and we create a lot of what's called edge habitat, which only certain species can live in because they're divided by roads. And that's a habitat destruction that we call fragmentation. That coupled with the invasive species, this being Japanese knotweed, and we pretty radically reshape the landscape and the rules that animals and plants have to live by. Again, in only a span of a couple of centuries. And also the evolution of domestication. It wasn't that many thousand years ago that there weren't any domestic animals or plants. And here, one of the most recent animals to enter our human space in the cities, coyotes, which are arguably becoming semi-domesticated because they're living in such close proximity to humans, often being supplemented in their diet by food given either intentionally or unintentionally by humans to them. So in the current period we live in, the so-called Anthropocene, wolves have been extirpated, meaning they're almost extinct. They're only found in certain areas. So dogs and coyotes have taken the place of wolves in urbanized habitats. And this phenomenon has been replicated by plants and animals across the planet. And I would argue, however, that overall, this whole process of the domestication, and sometime you ought to have me come back and I'll do a whole talk just on domestication, because I think it's the fundamental thing that makes us human. Because lots of animals have language, lots of animals are tool makers, lots of animals create medicine, lots of animals know their history, lots of animals mourn their dead. But we're the only species, with the exception of ants who have fungus gardens, we're the only species who've domesticated plants and animals. And as a result, it's made us super organisms. And so we have more food, we grow more food than we can eat at a given time. So we store food, and then we have to build cities to protect the granaries. We have agriculture, we have domestic animals, we have to protect those animals. That's what stopped us from being hunters and gatherers, which turned us into sedentary people who live in fixed areas and have Euclidean zoning and all that kind of stuff, and create nations and identities based on land. It's fascinating to think about that. And it's also allowed, for instance, in the United States, 4% of the population to grow all the food that the rest of us need. So we get to do other things. We get to be gardeners, we get to be dentists, we get to be musicians, we get to be lawyers, we get to be scientists, because we don't have to grow our own food. We don't have to spend all day looking for food. Think of how smart dolphins are. Think of how smart chimpanzees are. They still spend all day looking for food because they haven't domesticated crops. We have changed everything, allowed us to have a language, to have musical instruments. We have time on our hands. It's just amazing, just amazing. So what does that mean, especially for those of you who love birds? We have these new guilds of mesopredators, meaning middle-sized predators, because the big ones are gone for the most part. And these are feral cats from a study that we were doing down in San Pedro. And, they're the very essence of what we call a wicked problem, because trying to understand these outdoor cat behaviors is very complicated. And we know that feral cats kill millions of birds a year. The question is, what kind of birds are they killing? Are they killing rare birds, common birds, that kind of thing? And it's a wicked problem in ecology because there's no simple solution. There's no solution that everyone will agree to, because you have the rights of the cats, you have the rights of the landowners, you have the need for the survival of the birds, you have biodiversity interests, all of these kind of things. I mean, you could put well-meaning people around the table, give them all the information, they could be true of heart and all come up with different solutions and all be defendable. And so it's one of the hardest kinds of decisions to make in democracies, because we don't have a king that just slams her, or queen who slams her fist down on the table and says, we're doing this. And if you don't agree with us, you can leave. No, we're lucky we don't live in a country like that. We can debate this. And so the whole issue of feral cats in Southern California is a roiling argument that is complicated. And we could talk about some of the potential solutions that have been implemented, and I think they're very interesting, and I see some success. Okay, you said you wanted to hear about hummingbirds. So we're finally at slide 306. We're getting to hummingbirds. So this is a perching female Ellen's hummingbirds. Are just amazing creatures. They are synanthropic. Synanthropy is the condition by which you live near humans. And so especially Allen's hummingbirds are highly synanthropic. They do very well near humans. Populations in the Los Angeles area have increased as a result of urbanization, especially for those of you planting gardens that are hummingbird friendly and putting feeders out. You actually have increased the density higher than it was probably before. Now, other species have declined a bit as a result, but overall, for the most part, hummingbirds are doing pretty well. I mean, that's a success story with respect to managing urban ecosystems. This image in the lower right, fantastic image. This is from a company called Fleur. They lent us these cameras that take pictures measuring the heat of an organism. And so this is a heat image taken at night. And you can see from the image the whitest or the hottest areas. And this is going to be important. It'll come up later in our conversation. And this is where the eye is. Of course, that's going to be the hottest because that's where there's no feathers and the heat from the body is closest to the surface. So we actually use this kind of imagery to measure the metabolism of hummingbirds at night. Because as you know, hummingbirds, their metabolism is so fast that if they kept their metabolism at the same rate for a whole day, they would starve to death at night. So they have to shut down at night. They drop down to about 10% of their energetic demands. So it's a condition called torpor. And so we can measure the degree of torpor by measuring the temperature of their eyes at night. So birds are pretty amazing tools for studying the health of ecosystems, but bird populations are not equally distributed around the globe. And part of that is because the tree species and other vegetative communities that they rely on are not equally distributed. So here is a map of the distribution of tree species in the United States. And you can see as you get closer to the equator, the number of species go up. And that's because the effects of winter are lessened. So if you live up here, if you're a tree up here, you got to be dealing with pretty harsh winter conditions. And there's only certain kinds of metabolic responses that will work. But if you live in this part of the country, it really doesn't get very cold. You don't have to worry about frozen water. Ice does a lot of damage to plants. As you know, it ruptures the tissues because of the alignment of the water molecules when they freeze. But you don't have to worry about freezing down here. So you don't all have to breed at the same time and so forth. So you get specialization, you get higher levels of species richness and biodiversity. Well, the same is true for birds. So very far up north, between 0 and 50 species of birds, all the way down to Central America, where there's 700 species of birds that live there. So bird populations are not equally distributed around the planet. So when we ask questions about are the bird populations or the hummingbird populations healthy, we have to be specific about what part of the world we're asking. For instance, hummingbirds are only found in the New World, in the Americas. And where on the longitudinal grid would you find them? Because the farther north there are naturally going to be fewer species. And that's expected and that's normal. One of the reasons Los Angeles is so important as a site for conservation is we have 30 different, more than 30 different ecological communities, distinctly different ecological communities. So therefore, trying to protect them is really important. So what about hummingbirds? Well, we could spend forever talking about them because they're endlessly fascinating. Here's a Calliope hummingbird, this beautiful gorget. But here's what I call the bumper sticker version, because we just have a short amount of time and I want Lisa to be able to talk as well. They have some extraordinary capacities that are unlike other birds. And in fact, it is those capacities, by the way, that keep them so small, because the physics of their flight, the physics of the speed, the velocity which blood has to flow through their vessels is not compatible with larger animals. So you couldn't have a big hummingbird because it would just kind of explode. So hummingbirds have to be very, very small. They can fly in all directions. They can hover like a helicopter, and this has to do with unique wing anatomy. They can move their wings differently than other birds, and that allows them to have just incredible maneuverability. They're extremely acrobatic. They can fly in excess of 50 miles an hour. And they do this because their wings beat so fast. Take a moment and consider that under optimal metabolic demand, in other words, maybe they're flying from a predator, their wings can beat 200 beats per second. That's not a heartbeat, because our heartbeats are over 1,000. But we're talking about a fairly large mechanical device that has reciprocal motion, alternating itself 200 times a second. That's really extraordinary. And hummingbird heartbeats, in order to manage this kind of capacity, at rest beat 500 to 600 beats per minute, except during torpor, but they can exceed 1,000 beats per minute under maximum demand. And the amazing thing is there's hummingbirds that live 7 to 10 years. It's not like, a drag racing engine that has to be rebuilt every trip down the quarter-mile strip. This is a reasonably durable animal, some of which migrate hundreds and hundreds of miles. So most people know that their diet is nectivorous. In other words, that's their specialized bill and tongue structure allows them to reach down into plants that they've co-evolved with in order to get the nectar. And of course, they're doing that in exchange for the task of moving pollen from plant to plant. So they're key pollinators. Remember, sexual reproduction is complicated enough when you can move around. When you can't move, it's even harder. So if you're a plant, it's hard to get your pollen to the next plant. You have to have help. Sometimes that help comes in the form of wind. Sometimes it's an insect. Sometimes it's a bird. And often you've co-evolved this relationship because you don't want to give your nectar away to an animal that's not going to do the job for you. So the shape of the flower and the shape of the bill of the pollinator is very tightly coordinated through evolutionary time, whether it's an insect or a bird. So they're nectivorous, but what's the problem? Think about this for a moment. What's the problem? So basically, we think of hummingbirds as living on sugary drinks. What's the problem with living on sugary drinks?
No protein.
Yeah, it's the same thing as drinking fruit juice all the time. Plenty of calories, but no protein. And so these birds are also meat eaters. They're insect eaters. They're insectivorous. And if you give a hummingbird a choice, they will absolutely take an insect over sugar water. And most of us, when given a choice, we tend to be highly attracted to protein because protein is so critically important to it. We like sugar, we like salt, but boy, do we like protein. But they move a lot of liquid through their bodies. They up to 8 times their body weight each day in liquid. And of course, they serve this process of pollination, which is so essential. We've talked about this synchrony between the bill morphology, or the shape of their bill, and the flower morphology, the shape of the flower that they end up feeding on. That kind of specialization is called co-evolution or co-evolution. It's where 2 species are locked in an evolutionary relationship. We also see that with predator prey, that kind of thing. The leopard spots are co-evolutionary adaptations so that it's harder for antelope to spot the leopard. Physiology, I think the coolest, and here's a skeleton of a hummingbird. Look at that keel, that breastplate where the flight muscles attach. I mean, this is a tiny bird, but look at the proportion of its skeleton that is dedicated to the attachment of the flight muscles, because that's the hardest thing it has to do. And you can see um, this long bill and space around actually the back of the head where the tongue gets wrapped up and everything. So one of the most interesting aspects of the physiology of hummingbirds is that they use this sort of self-induced coma called torpor, which is like an overnight hibernation, which allows them to cope with the fact they can't feed at night. Most birds, birds are visual. They have incredible visual acuity, and that allows them to both fly and find food at the same time during the day. But at night, they basically, most birds, with the exception of oil birds and a few others, have to hunker down and just wait for light again. And if you're a hummingbird, you can't run at 600 beats per minute with your heart just sitting here. You're going to run out of your metabolic stores of energy. So you motor down. Now we see mammals do that on a seasonal basis, but these birds and a few others, some shorebirds, by the way, do the same thing. They motor down at night so that they can conserve energy.
So
They can.
I have a
Go ahead.
question here. Are they particularly vulnerable to predation at night?
Well, they're sitting ducks, no pun intended. So that's why they usually tuck in close to trees and they're motionless. So most predators, when they're looking for prey, the prey have to move. And when the prey move, that's what imprints on the brain of a predator. And so the whole notion of camouflage and this whole evolutionary adaptation called crypsis, how you hide from predators. You look like your background and you don't move. Just don't move. And it's amazing, to watch predators looking for prey, and you've actually spotted the prey. You're seeing in your binoculars like a rabbit. They just won't move until there's absolutely no other choice. Because and if they don't move at all and don't make a sound, then the predator may just walk right past. And it's always another truism in ecology. Usually prey species are better at escaping their predators than predators are at catching them, because there's a big economic differential. We call it the lunch death hypothesis, right? If the predator doesn't catch its prey, it goes hungry. If the prey gets eaten by the predator, it's dead. So there's a differential in the selective pressure to be hidden versus catch your prey. So they also, as you all know, have the incredible colorful and iridescent plumage, and acrobatic courtship displays to attract mates, and that's what makes watching them so cool. It's only the females that care for the young, by the way. The males defend territory and don't help with raising the young at all, but they do allow the females to pass through their territories without conflict. There's about a 15-day incubation period and a 20-day nestling period. So this period of high vulnerability for hummingbirds is about 40 days when they between laying the first egg and getting the last hummingbird out to fly. The females are working overtime. And during that 45-day window, the males can continue to go into torpor because they're not helping at the nest and therefore can sleep during the night. But the females have to keep their eggs and their babies warm. And so they have a tremendous problem, delicate balance to try and torpor as little as possible, but still not let their babies freeze to death at night. It's a very, very interesting puzzle or challenge for them to solve. So we call hummingbirds extremophiles, and that's a group of animals not organized by class or whether they have backbones or something. It's by the fact that they have very extreme metabolic functions, like the clams that live in the boiling hot water in the deep oceans. They're extremophiles because other organisms, their proteins won't hold together at that temperature, but those clams are able to do it. Or the fairy shrimp that can live locked in ice in the ponds of Massachusetts in the winter. They're extremophiles. Seals that can hold their breath for 30 minutes underwater. That's an extreme capacity. Or dive incredibly deep and not come up with the bends. So hummingbirds get their extremophile badge by their extreme daytime level metabolism. And therefore they have to maximize their energy gain during the day. uh, and balance that with an extremely low nighttime metabolism. And here we see a hummingbird in torpor. Notice the eye is closed. It's hunkered down tight onto the branch. And by the way, if you look at a bird's foot, which you may not have had much of a chance to do in your lifetime, one of the most incredible things of being a biologist is you get to hold wild animals in your hands. And I've held coyotes and all kinds of bird species and feral cats and things like that. It's just been amazing. But when we rest, our hands are like this. So if we want to grip something, we have to actively grip it. But birds, on the other hand, when their feet are at rest, they're like this. They have to actively open them up. And so when they go into torpor, their feet are already gripping, and that's the rest position. And so sometimes you'll see a hummingbird on a branch completely upside down. It's just hanging in a torpor position, and it'll wake up when needed. So maximize energy during the day, minimize energy at night. So here's an example from data that Eric Eberts and his team gathered when he was working with us. And here, this is a measure of metabolism. It's a volume of oxygen moving through the body per minute. That tells you how fast your cells. And here we are. And look at nighttime. It goes way down and then jumps up during the day. And here you can see the thermal image of a hummingbird at night. The eye is mostly closed, but it's still losing heat through the eye. We call the daytime period normothermy, torpor entry, torpor, and arousal. And then back to normothermy during the day. And here we see the reduction in body temperature and the constant temperature of the environment. You can see the differential. So sometimes it can be as much as a 20-degree difference between the temperature of the bird and the temperature of the environment. And nesting hummingbirds can use torpor, but they can't use it for as long. And here we see a nest, picture of a nest at night. And for some reason, these media aren't playing, and I have to figure out why. But it was picture taken throughout the night. So you can see how the temperature of the nest changes over time when the female's in torpor versus out of torpor. And the other cool thing about doing science is, we find new species and learn new things all the time. It's so wonderful. And in fact, just about a little over a year ago, a new species of hummingbird was discovered in the Andes Mountains of Ecuador. This is the blue-throated hill star, discovered in 2018, just published last year. It was found in the Andes Mountains. However, the population is under severe threat from mining, deforestation, and agricultural interests. There's only estimated about 750 left in the world. Professor Sornoso Molina and his team published these findings in a great journal of ornithology called the AUK, one of the oldest international journals of ornithology in the world, and a great image, very cool. So we're finding new things all the time. And in fact, conservation scientists think a lot of the big mammals and stuff, we found all of them and most of the birds. But when it comes to smaller animals, we probably have found less than half of them. Right now, we know with plants and animals and fungi and all that, we've discovered about 1.5 million, and we think there's probably double that amount out there. So, we're trying to save things we don't even understand yet. It's a very interesting challenge. So before I ask Lisa to jump in, I want to make sure that we're clear about an idea that I used a couple of times already. And I apologize for the jargon. Scientists have a lot of jargon, but I think it's justified because I think complex ideas need their own phrases so that the definitions remain precise. Once we have words that lose their precision, then we can be talking to each other using the same words, and we're actually meaning something quite different. And we know in the political landscape we exist now, which is certainly the most confrontational that I've ever lived in my 63 years, people are using the same words and meaning very different things, and it's kind of scary. But one of the challenges we have in managing the community for hummingbirds and all the other organisms that live there in the gardens that you're trying to maintain, and we use words like sustainability, we use words like restoration. Those are very difficult to define, and in some ways, impossible to maintain. When we talk about sustainability, ecosystems change all the time. So what are we trying to sustain? And restore is an even more complicated word, because what are we trying to restore to? When we talk about restoring wetlands, well, the climates have changed. There are now people living around it. The water quality's changed. What we're really talking about when we say sustainability and restoration is the idea of resilience and the idea of ecosystem services. And so what we can restore are ecosystem services. And these are the components of nature that are directly enjoyed, consumed, or used to yield human well-being. And those include the purification of air and water, the mitigation of droughts and floods, the generation and preservation of soils, renewal of their fertility, detoxification and composition of waste, pollination of crops and natural vegetation, dispersal of seeds, the cycling and movement of nutrients, and the control of the vast majority of agricultural pests. When nature is left to do its own thing, all these things take place. When we move in and alter the ecosystem, then we lose these natural components and we have to supplement them with technical solutions. Now, technical solutions are quite doable. I mean, we've taken 3 people and put them in spaceships and sent them to the moon and back. Those are pretty inhospitable places for humans to be. But the expense and the effort to do so can't be replicated for everyone on the planet. And so in a place like Los Angeles, we overwhelm our water system, so we have to bring water in from 400 miles away. We create 400 million gallons of human waste a day, so we have to have a series of 5 sewage treatment plants, the biggest being Hyperion, to manage all of that. But yet all these other services are taking place. And the more that we can foster those services, the less energy we can expend and technology we have to buy to make human lives healthy and secure. And so as we go forward thinking about the health and safety of communities, the idea of ecosystem service is a very powerful one. So I'm going to stop sharing here for a moment. And Lisa, I would love to invite you. We have 10 minutes or so to bring up your PowerPoint slide. Would you like to do that?
Sure, but you know what? Some of our guests might have questions for you. So we should give them a moment to think and ponder a question.
Like, when will it all be over? Just a few minutes. Hang in there, folks.
Kathy, do you want to give me the ability to share my screen, and I'll pull up my PowerPoint. Mine's longer than Eric's, but it's going to be short in my presentation.
There's just lots of beautiful pictures.
I'm going to leave it behind for everybody to use for reference.
So, and while you're doing that, if we have a couple of questions for Eric, what you will do is unmute yourself, ask your question, and please mute back again so the next person can ask. So,
you're now co-host, Lisa.
Okay.
So do we have a question for Eric? I think it's, I'm thrilled. I'll just comment while I can't see everybody. I am simply thrilled at the things you've told us today.
And I'm also happy to send the PowerPoint to you so that you can have it as a resource in your, you could print it out for people. You could do whatever you'd like.
Oh, that's very nice. There was so much information on each of your screens. For example, I wrote down the title of that book, Nature's Services, and the author, Daly.
Oh, it's wonderful. That's a great, wonderful, readable book. Lori Mazur, M-A-Z-U-R, has written the little primer on resilience, which I'm sitting at home and not in my office. I hold it up for you. It's a book all of my students read. It's very understandable. You can read it in an evening.
Nice.
It's from Island Press, and they're giving the book away for free because they think it's so important for us to have the idea of resilience in our language.
Yes. Wow.
Yeah, and I'd love to come back and talk to your group about resilience, because that's really where the future of ecology and the future of land management is.
Eric, we're going to ask you to come back because I wrote that down. Are you available in October?
Sure. Is it this time of the day?
Yes.
What's today? It's Thursday?
Thursday in the morning.
10 o'clock on I'm teaching at 10 o'clock on but I
okay.
can. We'll work out.
We'll
work out a time.
We will.
No, you mean this fall? I'm sorry, this fall. Yes, I can come back on a Thursday because I'm done at 9:45 with my class.
That's great. The speaker slot is at 11. So
perfect.
I'm going to hardline this into our calendar.
What's the date?
October. I'm looking at it. It's October 7.
Okay, let's bring Lisa up while I check that date, Lisa, and make sure we're not hosting somebody in the wetlands. My staff knows that Eric does not know the word no. And then my staff is always left to run around and pick up the mess after I'm supposed to be 2 places at once.
I love it. And if we can't do it October 7, we'll do it another time because
No, I'll be able to check this out.
I am not seeing questions for Eric. You could raise your hand or just unmute yourself.
The
and
7th is fine.
I just have a question, Kathy and Eric. I'm assuming that putting out the hummingbird feeders with the sugar water is probably not the best thing to do then for hummingbirds.
Well, that's a great question. And in fact, Lisa Tell, who is a colleague of ours who's working at the University of California at Davis, is studying that very question. And Lisa will probably have more information on that, but I would still encourage you to put out the hummingbird feeders as long as you keep the water clean and free of the molds and the fungus that grows, that black mold, because the birds make choices. And if the birds have flowers, they'll go there first. So it's this fear that you're weaning birds off of their natural food source. No. They still love their natural food sources. And, they're not going to make that more than 15-20% of their food. They just factor it in, and then if there's a crisis and that's all that's available, it'll save their lives.
Okay.
But no, I don't think you're going to train hummingbirds only to eat sugar water. Even we get sick of Snickers bars after a while.
That's true. Even a chocoholic has to stop sometimes. Thank you.
That's a great question. Lisa, do you concur?
Yeah, what we're finding is, bird species are in decline around the world, and hummingbirds are just as susceptible as other species. So anything you can provide to help them make the choices in their neighborhood, your neighborhood, is going to be to their benefit and yours.
That's wonderful. Lisa, why don't we take this moment then to ask you to share your screen and start your presentation.
All right. And do we have a hard stop at 11? Because that's 6 minutes from now. And I don't want to keep people if they don't want to stay on.
No, they'll vote with their feet, but I think most people are going to stay.
Why don't you try to finish up in like 10 or 15 minutes? Just give a test.
Yeah, I can be done in 10 minutes. And one of the things I want to mention too is that the book, Hummingbirds of the GOTTLIEB Native Garden, is available if people want to give a donation to our center. And this is one of the very charitable and generous things that the GOTTLIEB Foundation did. They basically gave Eric 1,000 copies of the book and said, here, use this to fundraise for your center. So we have a discounted rate. The book is worth $50. If you send me $30, I will send you the book for half price, $5 for sending it through the mail. And Eric, I just realized in this presentation I'm about to give, I don't have my address, but maybe I should put my address up so that people can, if they want to send a check, I can, and you make it out to Loyola Marymount University. And then I will know to send you the book. We're doing it that way. We're not doing it on Amazon. We've had
Amazon takes a piece of it. And
we've had a terrible time with Amazon. And to be honest, the money isn't that important to us. It's the gesture on your part to donate to what we're doing, because we are part of a nonprofit university. And we just want to spread the word. This is a beautiful book, beautifully written by Eric. gorgeous pictures by Dan Gottlieb. And we just want to share and do it in a way. You've given us your time to listen to this talk, so we feel we're obligate to you to give you an opportunity to get the book literally at half price. So.
And just as a side note, I'm not taking any royalties from the book. This is
that's a very important.
All goes to support our research, because our center is actually supported only by outside funds. The university does not support. It's called a soft money institute, and that's very common at universities. They pay my salary because I'm a professor there, but all of my staff are supported by grants and contracts and resources that we bring in.
And I will just say here that the Gottlieb Foundation has given us copies of your book.
Oh, okay.
And we're going to be drawing names for those, but
wonderful.
I'm totally thrilled that members who do not receive one can get one at a discounted price, and you'll make the
you know what I'm going to do right now? Since it's so obviously convenient, I'm going to put into the chat before I start my presentation my address. And the reason we're doing it this way, that was good, no address. The reason we're doing it this way is that we're still having some interesting COVID challenges at the university. For instance, getting mail. One thing I know is I'll get mail at my house. So if you're interested in getting the book, God, I can't type and talk at the same time.
No, you're trying to do too much, Lisa, as always.
What you can do is, drop the check in the mail, and then I can mail you back the book.
So everyone here, remember how to use your chat. If you just put your mouse over the bottom of the screen, if you don't see chat there, click on more and you'll see chat there. And Lisa has put the info in there. So if your name is not drawn today, you can still get a discounted copy of what I have to say, because I've reviewed it. It's a gorgeous book focusing all on hummingbirds.
All right, I think I did it correctly now. This is my home address. You address the checks just to Loyola Marymount University. I'll know when I get the check what it's going towards the book, and you'll get a book from me.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Of course. It's what we do. Okay, I'm going to get through this really fast. And this is basically an addendum to what Eric shared. A lot of what we do at the center is celebrate the glory of wildlife and birds and trees and gardens. And again, we're so grateful to the Gottliebs for funding my fellowship for the last 4 years. I am so indebted to them. And this is a photograph of some of our staff members and teachers. We're visiting the Gottlieb Native Garden as part of our education curriculum. You can go to their website to just poke around and see what's going on. It's just such an amazing garden. We've hosted international experts at the Gottlieb Native Garden. Mark Wainwright, who just did a high school presentation for the kids' summer school at LMU, which was fabulous. He does a lot of work down in Costa Rica. This is Dr. Pete Auger with some LMU staff. We're at the Gottlieb Native Garden. You can see feeders in the background. This is one of my favorite photos of the Gottlieb Native Garden's bird bath. It's just amazing when you see 50 hummingbirds show up in her garden. It's insane. And the reason it happens is it's called an edge effect. She is on the Coldwater Canyon edge, the canyon itself. So hummingbirds come from all around, and they don't compete because they figure, well, it's too much work to chase all these hummingbirds away. I don't have to defend this one feeder. What the heck? Let's let them all eat. Normally, they'd be very defensive, the males. This is Mark Wainwright here. That's Dr. Auger. This is a group of people birding. When COVID lifts next spring, the Gottlieb Native Garden will probably be available during the Theater Pane Garden Tour in April. So keep your eyes peeled for that. You've got to go see this garden. It's spectacular. And these are just some fun photos of all of us together. Eric's giving Susan a proclamation from the city, again, appreciative of all the work they do. This is the Gottlieb's Dan and Carl, one of their photographers that photographs along with Dan. We're at Discovery Park here. This is Scott Logan here with Eric and myself. In fact, we're wearing t-shirts for the Theater Pane Garden Tour. So is Susan right here in her garden. One day I was volunteering. I have to share this. Eric, do you remember the day I was volunteering? We had 500 people come through her garden in one day. I was exhausted by the end because you want to talk and share about all the wonderful things in her garden. It was like a record. It was amazing. And this is the park where we showcase native plants. And if you're on our side of the hill in the community of Playa Vista, you're welcome to come. It's open to the public. You can do a self-guided tour. It's a model of a watershed. Here's Dr. Strauss leading students from the mountains to the cityscape. Again, we bring thousands of children through this garden in partnership with the Friends of Ballona Wetlands and their education programs. We focus mostly on older children, but here you can see these are elementary school kids. Here I am teaching kids about native California Encelia or sunflowers, and they're logging in their books what they're looking at. They're becoming little mini scientists. Recently, during the pandemic, I thought, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to certify the garden. And I spent the whole year getting all these certifications for our garden, which I'm so proud of. And who was my mentor? Susan Gottlieb. And here's some information. Again, this will be made available to you where you can actually register your own garden. There's all kinds of ways to acknowledge your involvement in trying to save wildlife in an urban setting. And the newest is this Homegrown National Park registration you can do. It's completely free. It's through Doug Tallamy, who's an amazing scientist with the University of Delaware. And he wrote a book, which I'm going to talk about in a second, that really changed everything because he included scientific data to absolutely show the cause and effect of putting in native plants in your garden and what it does for wildlife. He was the one who literally started it all. This is actually, this photograph here is a photograph of my driveway where I have my signage up. And something I'm participating in partnership with the Friends is this wonderful Grow Native Gardening Club and classes in Discovery Park. Again, building on the momentum and the enthusiasm that was created by Susan and what she did with the Gottlieb Native Garden. Here's some students that were given free copies of the Gottlieb Native Garden California Love Story book. Again, due to the incredible generosity of the Gottliebs, they published the books, they paid for it all, and they just gave us the books to give away, to tell the story, to share the joy. And one of the messages we're really up on right now with the center is talking about lawns. And if you have a lawn, don't feel bad. I love lawns. I'm from the East Coast. But what I'm realizing now is if we cut our lawn footprint in half and put in edge effect native gardens full of native plants from the area you're in, you're going to see a tremendous difference in your wildlife. And this is just a couple of images of messaging about the lawn and how when you have huge swatches of lawns, you have very little wildlife. But as you break it up into swales and put in trees, the wildlife increases. And you want this balance even in your urban settings. And this is the paradigm. This is the latest news with all of these organizations across the country and around the world. This is my garden in Mar Vista years ago. I'm renting my house. I'm going on 10 years. And I decided I wanted to put in native plants, but I left some of the non-native. You know, I have African daisy here. It's pretty. It looks good with the Encelia. I left it. You don't have to be, you know, you don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You can do a mix, do a California garden. And this was my garden one spring. It was just delightful with a field of poppies. And I had Encelia and Phacelia and this is called Elegant Clarkia. I also had some sunflowers. Here I have, this is a more current version, which I have a manzanita with Indian mallow and fuchsia in bloom, which the hummingbirds love. And like Susan, you can create a sanctuary in your own garden. This is in my garden now. And all of these plants were blooming in my garden in the spring. I love California rose, it has such a delicate flavor, fragrance. Here's a bee getting full of pollen, Sonoran bumblebee, which is a great bumblebee to have in your yard. Another one, its butt sticking out of an Indian mallow. I love this. Fiery skipper on Lilac Verbena, which is very, very fragrant. You can cut these blossoms, put them in a vase, and I'm not kidding, they will last 7 to 10 days in your house and give off this amazing fragrance. And this is Doug Tallamy's, really his warning. Insects are not optional anymore. It's not okay if they disappear. They are the primary drivers of our ecosystems, as Eric mentioned in his presentation. If they go, we go. 96% of all terrestrial birds raise their young on insects. Think about that. And when you exterminate the bugs, you actually are exterminating the birds. And autumn was a big deal to me back east. Out here, for whatever reason, we're blowing the leaves and collecting them. And we really need to go in reverse. Leaves need to be left in areas of your garden. They don't have to be all over your garden or all over your lawn, but they can be nestled in the corners, in the edges, to provide wildlife spaces to rest and procreate. And this is, again, not coming just from us at the Center for Urban Resilience. This is coming from all kinds of organizations around the country. This is an organization called Healthy Yards. Moths are a very big part of bird diets, and they're disappearing. And again, the messaging over and over, when you treat autumn leaves like trash, beautiful creatures are chopped up and carted away. And remember, your yard is literally a universe. The other day, I discovered native praying mantis in my front yard on my manzanita. I was in heaven, because I've wanted the native praying mantis forever. You go to like Armstrong or Home Depot, you can get praying mantis eggs, but guess what? They're the Chinese praying mantis, which is fine, but they're in competition with our native praying mantis. And the only reason they sell them at these big box stores is that they're easy to do, easy to procreate. And I used to do it and I loved them, but because I have the native ones now, I'm even more excited. So your yard is shared by all these different creatures. I had a jumping spider in my house the other day and I let it outside because my cat would have killed it. Love jumping spiders. They won't bite. They're just so amazing to look at. And again, the messages cannot be underestimated. If half of the American lawns were replaced with native plants, we would create the equivalent of a 2 million acre national park, 9 times bigger than Yellowstone or 100 times bigger than Shenandoah National Park. And Doug is saying it has to happen quickly. We're at a turning point worldwide. So should I poison? You know, you've got rats. I've got rats. I've got an avocado tree in my backyard and I'm full of fruit rats. I don't know what to do because I don't want to poison them so that they poison down the chain and poison the owls in the area. But it's kind of excessive and it's a real issue, but there's ways to handle it without using poison. And Eric is very big on ecosystem services. And this is just some information, again, reiterating what he shared in his presentation. Here's just an extraordinary view of California wildflowers in bloom during the spring. These are orange poppies. And something that we're very big on at the Center for Urban Resilience is the value of trees. And Dr. Michelle Romolini is kind of our expert on trees. And I'm just going to fly through these because I don't want to take up any more of your time. There's a lot of information to share, and you'll have copies.
Yeah, we're getting to 10 after, Lisa.
Well, then I'm just going to keep on moving. So one of the things I did want to share, and this is Eric, who was published in a paper talking about ecosystem services. This was a Tree People event that we had debuting a LA Canopy tree canopy assessment tool. You can go to our website and actually see what your garden is full of percentage-wise trees. Again, I cannot stress enough the research of Doug Tallamy on oaks, all kinds of things on oaks. But we have an oak dilemma in the state of California because there's all these rules and restrictions. Burbank, you have your own dilemma. This was a story about a beautiful 100-year-old oak tree that got uprooted. And this is some information about how to save our oak trees. They're the best tree to put in if you had a choice, in a nutshell. Nature and health. Here's some scientific evidence about trees and green space. Again, you can read at your leisure. I'm a collector, as you can see. I grab these articles. I go, oh, we've got to talk about this. And again, be kind to trees. They're busy saving the world. Some information on California fires. I'm going to fly through this because I just want to get to, again, getting back to the GOTTLIEBs and our gratitude for all that they've done. This is the series of books that have recently been released. Eric's Hummingbird book is one of them. There's also a children's book that was written by Lisa Tell. If you're interested, you can contact us. There's California in a Vase. You can get that through the California Botanic Garden. If you go to their website, I believe that sells either for $39.99 or $50. I'm not sure what they're charging. A companion book to GOTTLIEB Native Garden, A California Love Story. The first book that was put out is this GOTTLIEB Native Garden, An Intimate Wildlife Journey by Scott Logan. That's a wonderful book to read. These are just some of my personal favorites, reading about nature. And these are 5 recommended books about trees. I'm really big on trees lately. These are 2 books that I highly recommend you read about the garden. Again, both written by Doug Tallamy. A laundry list of books you can read about birds, trees, and gardens. Just some fun little quotes. Again, thank you, Dan and Susan. And this is a photograph of our medicinal plant garden in Discovery Park. Come visit, again, anytime. This is what you can do, and this is what we did in the garden. We've got all kinds of signage. And that's it.
That was incredibly super, Lisa. Can you tell me, is Discovery Park disabled accessible?
Yes, ADA compliant.
Okay.
And if you want, I am happy to meet you there and lead a tour for your group. You'll get more out of it. If you come cold, you're just going to have to walk around, and I'm going to embellish. So I'd be happy to do so.
We may be talking to you, but thank you so much.
It would really be wonderful to have the club come to the park. You could host that, and there's wonderful places to sit. You could bring a lunch, and we could have an informal conversation. And I'm executive director of the park.
And you can socially distance. Ironically, during the COVID, when it was really bad last year, in the community of Playa Vista, they have about 40 parks. This was one of the parks they left open. Why? Because people were being respectful and socially distancing, and you could do it because you could walk all around, and you could be 10 feet away from anybody walking next to you. So it was fabulous.
I have so much I want to say, but lots has been said. I bet there are questions. Unmute yourself and raise your hand if you have a question for either Lisa or Eric. I'm looking. I think we still have 17 people here. That's so wonderful. See, they stayed on. All right, you need to either raise your hand and I'll unmute you, or just unmute yourself and ask.
I'm here. It's me again, Sandy. Sorry, I just got out of my water class, so I didn't even change to do this. But is there a way to get that list, especially the list of the children's books? I think it's really important to start with children. That's the next generation, and we need to really
Sandy,
educate.
what we're going to do
Yes.
is to send both of these PowerPoints as PDFs to you, Kathy, and then you can distribute them digitally to your to any of your members.
You know what? I'll put my email address in too, because Kathy, I need your email address if I'm going to send you the PowerPoint.
Okay. And I actually have yours, Lisa.
Oh, good.
Diane Shader Smith.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
So I will be in touch with you. You will give me the PowerPoint, and I will send that to everyone, and you can review everything at your leisure. I see Anne has a question.
Thank you.
Yes, I have a question. The first book you mentioned, Eric, that you could read in an evening, I don't think it was part of the PowerPoint. How do we get that book?
So that is published by Island Press, which is one of the most important publishers of environmental literature. And the author is Laurie, Laurie, Laurie Mazur, Mazur.
And the name of it again?
Resilience Matters.
Thank
So it's
you.
kind of a play on words. So it both matters, and here are the elements of resilience. So she's distilled the work of a lot of different scientists, and Island Press felt it was important enough that they make it available for free.
And I wrote it down. I'll send it to everybody.
Yeah, it's absolutely extraordinary. And again, it's got wonderful charts and very understandable. And, you know, if you have a book club or a little group that could read together, it's just, you know, it's not textbooky at all. Taken from someone who writes textbooks. I apologize for them because of the density we're required to make them. This is much more understandable. I'm looking to see. No, the book is in my office.
That's okay.
Your other office.
Yes, the other office, the office at the university, which we're finally allowed to go back to.
I'm going to make a shout out to Dr. Talamy. I've been listening to some of the YouTube talks that in which he talks about these things, and he does tout the oak tree as the #1 tree for the most number of wildlife creatures it attracts and supports. But he has lists, and reading his lists, I know I don't have room for an oak, but I do plan to put in toyon this fall.
Wonderful.
Because it's like one of his top 10 for plants that will attract wildlife.
It's funny, that's a slide I didn't include. This is new that he's published this. Yeah.
He gave a great lecture for the California Native Garden Club for Northern California, which is recorded. And that was one of the beginning lectures for that tour that they had on for 5 Sundays or 4 Sundays in a row.
I think you shared that with me. Maybe that's where I found it. So thank you for that. Questions, people?
I just have a quick comment. My name is Rebecca, and I live in Alhambra. And we have maybe about 2 or 3 hummingbirds that live in one of my trees in the yard. And I was very surprised to know that they have individual, I would say, songs. One of them makes like a clicking sound, and one of them makes a very, very unusual call. I don't even know how to describe it. But I just never knew that they each had a different way of singing, and I know exactly when they're in their area. It's just amazing to hear that sound. So that was just,
they are quite extraordinary. You know, they don't have the capacity of other songbirds. They are a family that evolved a little bit earlier before the really complex syrinx of the modern songbirds that we hear that have this incredible melodious. But I think you're referring to the chirr that the male does when he's being defensive and trying to chase others away. And then their territorial calls, their contact calls that they do, it's pretty amazing. So it's all contextual. We understand when they use those calls and under what circumstances. So it's wonderful. Our lab also studies crows, and crows are, they have 35 distinct words, and they recognize each other individually and have individual names, and that's pretty amazing. But hummingbirds are not social like that. They don't live in extended family groups and have helper systems and stuff like that. So their vocal system is as evolved as it needs to be. Whereas things like magpies and crows and ravens that live in these really complex social groups have to have even more complex vocal language.
Well, if we have no, Janet's raising her hand. Janet?
Thank you, Kathy. I have a very kind of social question. I live in Burbank. I have a hummingbird feeder. I have in my garden many, many plants that the hummingbirds are attracted to, but I also have one feeder. And it seems like my hummingbirds spend far more time fighting over that one feeder than they do actually drinking the fluid from it. And I wonder, should I add a second feeder? Would that help? I've changed the position around thinking maybe that would help, but they just seem very unhappy at each other.
Well, I'll let Lisa jump in here, but I'll tell you the males are going to fight. Depending on the time of year, they're going to fight over everything all the time. It's what they do. They're kind of dripping with testosterone, and so they can't help it. But certainly more feeders, as long as you can keep up with the maintenance and it doesn't, it's not overwhelming to keep them clean, then, especially if they're separated, then they can feed with less conflict. Lisa?
That's what Susan has discovered. The more feeders you have, the less likely the males who are trying to defend their territory will fight. And just try it as an experiment, see what happens.
Great, thanks, I'll do that. Thank you. It's a wonderful presentation. It's been a delightful morning. We really appreciate you.
Well, I see no raised hands, so we can move on to the drawing names portion. I want to thank Eric and Lisa for just a fantastic presentation today. Be in touch so that I can, get all the background materials to send out to everybody.
Wonderful.
And this is recorded, so we'll be posting that on YouTube. Thank you very, very much. Everybody who wants to stay for the drawing, stay with us. If Lisa and Eric want to move on, please feel free or stay with us.
I'm going to take my leave because I have another call I have to go to at 11:30. So
thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you in October.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thanks, Lisa. Bye, everybody. All right.